Hey everyone, welcome to session 148 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. I am joined today by Shira Karpel and Shayna Gaunt, founders of howtoaba.com. And they join me to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that's supporting the newly minted BCBA. And as you might know by now, that's very often the closing question of the podcast. And in this episode, we pretty much spent the entire time talking about strategies to help early stage professionals. But as it turns out, the advice that Shira and Shayna provided on topics ranging from mentorship to setting professional boundaries is helpful for BCBAs of all experience levels. I got a lot out of this, which is, I guess, what I'm trying to say. Moreover, Shira and Shayna talk about how they created howtoaba.com. It's a unique community that provides materials, continuing ed opportunities, and all sorts of other things to like-minded behavioral practitioners. And in this episode, they share their experiences in developing that and what they've learned along the way about the needs of the profession. So we talk about common challenges faced by newly minted BCBAs and how to address them, common mistakes early practitioners make, strategies to establish professional boundaries. We talk about in particular, avoiding burnout and how to communicate effectively with boundaries, the motivation behind creating their platform, howtoaba.com, and what practitioners these days are looking for. What are their continuing education needs when they are looking for trainings to sign up for? We also talk about the ABA Forum. It's a 3-night event of free content that they're providing. That's coming up real soon. You can learn more about that. I've got links to everything in the show notes for today's episode, so you're going to want to head over to behavioralobservations.com and look for session 148. On a housekeeping note, we had some Zoom connectivity issues, and Shira's audio in particular flaked in and out a few times during our recording. I decided not to edit that out because I think what she was saying it was intelligible despite some of the internet garbles, and it improved as the discussion wore on. So we were able to kind of solve the problem during the interview itself. So if you notice that, it does improve as the show goes on. So this episode is brought to you by the 2021 Virginia Association for Behavior Analysis Conference. This year's VABA conference is on April 15th and 16th. And while this will be a safe and socially distanced in-person event, it will also be available online. So don't worry if you're not local to the Virginia area. You can go to virginiaaba.org for more info. And if you do sign up, use the promo code GOMBU to save at checkout. We're also brought to you by HRIC Recruiting. Barb Voss has been placing BCBAs in permanent positions throughout the country for just about a decade. And she's been in the recruiting business for over 30 years, so she really knows her stuff. And so when you work with Barbara, you work directly with her. There's no middleman involved, and you'll have highly personalized service as a result. So if you're about to graduate, or if you're looking for a change of pace, if you have a move coming up, or if you really just want to know if the grass is greener on the other side, go to hricolorado.com and schedule a confidential chat with Barb right away. And last but not least, I am throwing a 5-year anniversary sale on all Behavioral Observation CEU events. So it's 55% off all CEU events. Just use the code 5years at checkout. And you can find all the offerings over at behavioralobservations.com/getCEUs. This offer is valid as of this recording, and it expires at the end of February 2021. And if you don't need CEUs, but you want to get ad-free podcast access to bonus content, member Q&A, Zooms, and more, consider joining the Behavioral Observations Patreon group. And for more information about that, go over to patreon.com/behavioral observations. All right, I think that does it for opening remarks. So without any further delay, let's get to this fun interview with the folks from howtoaba.com.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Shira Karpel and Shayna Gaunt from howtoaba.com. Thanks for joining me today on the Behavioral Observations Podcast. How you guys doing? Way up there in the Great White North, as sometimes we call it.
Thanks for having us. We're happy to be here.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining me. One of the things that's been obviously for people who've been listening to the show over the last kind of several sessions, that they've heard me talk about howtoaba.com and the good work that you guys are doing mentoring BCBAs in the field. So I thought it would be fun to have you guys in for a chat and talk about some of the ways in which you provide this mentoring. But I think on a perhaps more global level, what are some of the challenges that you're seeing in our, kind of newly minted workforce, and even us behavior analysts of all ages, if you will, and just have a general conversation about things that you found helpful and so on and so forth. So having said all that, again, just I want to say welcome to the show, and I'm looking forward to kind of getting into this stuff. And as we do that, I want to start off with allowing you guys to tell us a little bit about your backgrounds, and of course, as we like to do here on the show, talk about how you got into ABA in the first place. So let's start with that. So either Shayna or Shira. Shira, do you want to go first?
Okay, so I got into the field through education. I knew I always wanted to be in early intervention and work with kids. I just didn't know that this field existed. And I was teaching a class of, preschool kids, and I was just feeling like there were some kids who I couldn't reach, and they were really falling through the cracks. And I was so curious about how I could reach these kids. And then with moving to Toronto, I kind of actually found Shayna and learned that this thing existed called ABA. And I really fell in love with it. I found it was the solution to so many things about education and even parenting. At the time, I had 3 little kids, and I with my kids, learned all these amazing behavioral solutions. And from there, I went on to get my BCBA, and I currently work as the Director of Behavioral Services for an organization that provides, school consultation, one-to-one therapy, parent training, any one of those things. And I've just been loving the field.
Very nice. And you said you connected with Shane. How did you guys actually meet?
Through Shira's sister, actually.
Yeah, I was living in the States, in Texas. That's where I was teaching, and I was moving back to Toronto. And my sister put us in touch, but it was interesting because we spoke, and Shayna told me about the field, but we never actually ended up working together. And then I just pursued it on my own, and I pursued it, and I was looking for any opportunity. And then we actually just ended up working on the same team, where I was the therapist and Shayna was the consultant on the team. And it was kind of like fate.
I see.
And that's kind of how we started working together. And that was 11 years ago.
Wow.
So long ago. Yeah.
Wow. So Shayna, were you like, hey, Shira, you've got some potential here? Were you?
Oh, Shira was amazing. She was one of the best therapists I've ever worked with. Yeah, it was great. So right off the get-go. And then you put 2 and 2 together, right? So it's like, oh, you're her sister. Oh, wow. Why didn't we do this sooner?
Oh, wow. How completely random. That's awesome. All right. So Shayna, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you found ABA? What was your, kind of first experience with it, and, kind of what made you say, hey, this is kind of what I want to do?
For sure. So I got in the field over 20 years ago now because I, quote unquote, wanted to help people. Didn't really even know what autism was, graduated from undergraduate psychology, went into sales and marketing and went, this isn't for me. So my friend's aunt was a pediatrician who diagnosed kids with autism, and she got me into the field, and it was amazing. I loved it right from the get-go. I loved it so much that I got in touch with somebody from the States and went down to the States for a while and did ABA down there. And then I got my BCABA and came back to Ontario. And then I was one of the first people in Ontario to get my BCBA. I still love it. Right now, I currently do some private consulting, and I also run some centers in Toronto.
Very nice. Very nice. So you guys kind of did the Wonder Twin powers and kind of got together and, formed How to ABA. So I guess I have 2 questions for you. Kind of what is How to ABA for those who are unfamiliar with it? And then also what made you want to start it? What were the needs you were seeing, and what made you think that this was a kind of unique solution to address those needs. So you can kind of take those two things in any order or direction you want.
Yeah. So throughout kind of my training, I was learning about this like amazing field. And I was like, people need to know about this. That was one where it was like, there are so many amazing solutions. Shayna was my supervisor. And, over the years of us working, kind of collected all of these, like, for lack of a better word, just resources, like programs, program materials, graphs, like every kid that we would get, like we would create something for them. But then it got to the point where it was like, wow, like we're not recreating it anymore with each student. And now we've amassed like almost we just have a Google Drive, right? We've collected this Google Drive full of resources. And it got to the point where we were like, you know what, the field really needs this. There isn't enough sharing of resources. There isn't enough speaking to like, the professional, the practical professional. There's a lot out there for theory and cordage of that. But in terms of like, I'm a professional, I'm going to meet this new client, like, what do I do? There's so much in our courses that really isn't practical. So we thought we could really share a lot of these practical resources that we've collected through the years and make other people's lives a little bit easier.
I see. I think everyone who, at least, I think it's easier now with so many kind of canned resources out there. I don't mean canned in a pejorative way. It's awesome that these things exist, and I'm insanely jealous that that these things like all these curricula are available. Whereas back in the day, we were kind of writing our own instructional programs and making our own data sheets and things like that. Still, plenty of us do, and I think I have a folder on my hard drive that, has data sheets that I've made 15 years ago, and programs that I've written and things like that. So I think behavior analysts of a certain age, or, who aren't working in, structured, kind of curricula and systems probably have these kind of treasure troves of information. And you're right. A lot of times it just kind of exists on our own computers. And so I think the fact that you guys recognize this and are available to share them is just awesome.
My background comes from home therapy. And, 20 years ago, like you said, Matt, it was really lonely out there. You'd go and you'd typically work in a kid's basement by yourself, and you wonder if anybody was ever taking notice of what you did. And then you'd go home at night and you'd get a program or a written program from your supervisor the next day, or you would be the supervisor and have to write this program. It would take you forever to do it because you didn't even know where to start. So it's really great that there are curricula that exist out there now, which is amazing. But at the same time, those programs are amazing, but they can be cookie cutter as well. Every kid with autism isn't the same. So assessments are wonderful, but we can't be programming to assessments. We still need to be able to write our own curriculum so that we are, filling that need to be individualized and have that individualized curriculum. So, kind of going back to what How to ABA does is that, we try and take that time consumption away from people. We've written all these programs. Like you said, we've got 1 million programs on our hard drive too. So, taking away that time to write those programs, we are giving it back and saying, here's our curriculum. We're doing it in editable format so they can edit it themselves and come up with their own individualized program. And the other thing too that we're offering is community. Like I said, going into some kid's basement, if you're not working at a massive center and you're not seeing, a BCBA on a regular basis, or you're not seeing colleagues on a regular basis, it's really lonely out there. And it's not that people don't want to share, but I think people don't even know where to go to share. So that's what we want to do is we want to, have people feel supported and confident by providing a community to other BCBAs, whether they're newly minted BCBAs or whether they've been in the field for a while and just need somebody else to bounce ideas off of.
Yeah, it was summer of 2019. I filled in for a maternity leave at a clinic with my friends at Keen Perspectives in White River Junction, Vermont, and it was amazing to be able to bounce those ideas off of colleagues and things like that. And those are opportunities I kind of rarely get as a solo practitioner who's consulting just to schools. So I definitely get the isolation, and I've seen the other side of that, where you have these awesome opportunities to kind of have these kind of unplanned and or sometimes planned interactions with other practitioners who, hey, have you seen this? I'm struggling with this. Have you seen a kid who does X, Y, or Z? And yeah, that's really cool. And obviously, there's a lot of groups on Facebook and things like that. But at the same time, we don't want to be in a situation where people are reaching out to Facebook for client consultation and things like that. That's a whole other podcast we can get into about, being very careful with in terms of how you solicit assistance and things like that. So I'll perhaps defer on going down that rabbit hole for a while, but I just kind of wanted to echo that sentiment because I've certainly kind of lived it. And particularly before the field has kind of exploded, I think that need was even more acute. I think people keep throwing around the statistic that more than half of the current BCBAs have been certified in the last 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know if have you guys heard that?
Wow.
That's fabulous for our field, but at the same time, I feel so badly for those BCBAs. Where do they turn to get that support?
All right, before we get to the answer to that question, we're just going to take a quick break here and remind you of the upcoming 2021 Virginia Association for Behavior Analysis Conference. It's happening on April 15th and 16th. It'll be a safe and socially distanced in-person event with an online component as well. It'll be totally available online. So don't worry if you are not local to that neck of the woods. There's lots of great stuff in this year's event. And if you want to learn more about it, you can go to virginiaaba.org and click on the conference tab there. If you do sign up for it, use the promo code GOMBU, which stands for Go Mary Baldwin University, who's a major sponsor of this event. And using Go MBU at checkout can save you some money for your registration. And there will be links to this at this episode of the Behavioral Observations show notes. So go to behavioralobservations.com and look for this episode to learn more. All right, let's get back to this conversation with the folks from howtoaba.com. That's a masterful segue, Shayna. I have to commend you on that because that's the next kind of second. We didn't plan this, people. I just want to let the audience know that, or at least I did, but that was very, very deft because I want to get into just that. So I know a lot of the folks who subscribe to howtoaba.com are kind of early stage practitioners, or as we like to call them here on the podcast, newly minted BCBAs. And so I'm curious, what are the challenges that you're seeing with this population of providers? And to that extent, are these issues more universal regardless of one's, experience level?
I think it starts with the supervision. And I think we all kind of acknowledge that the level of supervision that people are getting in the field may not be consistent. There's a lot of opportunity to kind of purchase supervision hours. There's really no way to standardize the level of supervision that people are getting. And I think as a supervisor now, I know how hard it is to really give good quality supervision, how much time it takes, that it's really challenging. So I think people are coming into the field with varying levels of supervision, maybe having passed the exam, because the exam isn't really a reflection of how good of a practitioner you could be. The exam is more a reflection of do you know the content, do you know the theory, and are you a good test taker? But it usually doesn't pass into the level of behavior analysis that you can really provide. So I think that's the first challenge coming into the field, really maybe not being as prepared as you should have been through your supervision. I think another challenge is people want a solution, right? They want to be able to open a book and provide a curriculum. And I think that that's why a lot of that exists, where it's like, I don't really know what to do. I wasn't trained. I wasn't taught how to write a program, how to take this student from, intake to assessment to programming to moving them through the process. It really wasn't part of the theory that we learn in our in the courses that we take for the BCBA. Hopefully it was part of your supervision, but maybe it wasn't. Some of those solutions, like we said, kind of become just cookie cutter. Like you can't look at every kid and think that you can use the same, receptive labels program for every single student, because it's going to look different. Children have different learning styles. Each student needs a different prompting level. You really have to be able to kind of take a step back and look at the big picture. And I think that's the analysis part that a lot of people are missing. There's a lot in terms of like, oh, give me a program or a curriculum or, fill in this box on the assessment, but we're not really able to kind of look at the big picture. And I think that's something that we could do better at as a field. Is we're coming newly minted BCBAs need to be able to, it's almost like catch-22, because it's something that comes with experience, but you also have to acknowledge when you're first coming into the field that you maybe don't have that experience. So I would recommend someone coming, straight out of the exam to not jump into it too soon, continue your supervision. Don't feel like you need to start a practice. Get the community, get the mentorship. Like I've been a BCBA for many years. I still work with Shayna. Like we still need each other. So I think that those are some really important things for people new into the field need to consider.
Yeah, I can't remember who said it, but I've heard this quote that's going around recently that, passing the BCBA, it's like, congratulations, you now have the, kind of minimum level of qualifications or something like that, or you're at another kind of starting point in your career, and it's important to continue to accrue mentorship and in whatever way in which you can find it. I think that it's one of those things where after passing the exam, it's tough because people expend so much energy preparing for it and getting their supervision hours. We're talking like kind of blood, sweat, and tears, and oftentimes going through school and getting supervision, it's a costly thing too. So the last thing you want to do is to kind of add to that. But at the same time, the need to do that is as you say, it can oftentimes be really helpful if you're not in an environment where you're kind of wrapped in a super supportive community. Some of the agencies that I've become aware of, how they support early stage practitioners. They kind of wrap them in some existing supports to avoid some of those problems that you were just describing. But I think that type of support is more ad hoc. It's not something that's routinely planned. It's not something that is that is standardized in any way, shape, or form. And so there are obviously going to be practitioners who may not find themselves in such an environment or falling through the cracks.
And I love that if you can get in after writing your BCBA, if you can get into a large organization or continue with the large organization that you were in before you wrote your exam, amazing. That's fabulous. If you see somebody who is wonderful in the field, grab their coattails and run with it, and be there. Even though I've had 20 years of experience, I still don't know everything either. That's why I go to Shira. Shira always laughs because she says she comes to me. Well, I go to Shira just as much as she comes to me, because we have to bounce ideas off of each other. And I think that's not just being a professional BCBA, but being a professional period and being an adult period, is that you need to be able to bounce ideas off of each other.
For sure. Is there one like really common mistake you see early stage practitioners make? And maybe mistake is maybe too strong of a word, but an issue or a challenge that you see in this population of providers?
Yeah, I don't think mistake. You're right. I don't think mistake is the right word, but oftentimes that we'll see newly minted BCBAs and even old hags like me, sometimes we get pigeonholed into something that's not going to matter in 5 years from now, right? What do I mean by that? I mean, what we need to do is we need to look at every child as, number one, someone's child, period, not just, this person doesn't fill this box or does fill this box. This person is a person, period, and they're someone's child. But where is this person going to be in 5 years from now? Let's think about that big picture and then work backwards. So instead of, trying to push the agenda of FFCs because we need to fill in boxes, we think, oh, wow, like this kid needs to be toilet trained and this kid needs functional life skills. And, in 5 years from now, this kid who's severely nonverbal needs to be able to at least communicate their needs with something. And that's I think where the bigger picture lies, is them thinking about the bigger picture. And, if anything, I would say, as a newly minted BCBA, try and think outside of the box a little bit, be a bit more creative in meeting families' needs and try and meet families where they're at as well. Instead of pushing our agenda, meet the families where they're at, ask them what their goals are as a family and start there.
Yeah. That's a really important point. I think if Pat McGreevy was listening to you, I think he would be applauding that. I like how I think indirectly you kind of described his essential for living taxonomy of the things you must have, things you should have, things that would be nice to have in terms of skills. And I might be not getting that exact terminology correct, but I like how that curriculum kind of breaks those things down. Here are the things you really, really need to think about. And it does kind of prompt you to think through some of those issues that you described. So, I appreciate you providing that example. What are some, so how do you guys, with either the community or some of the resources that you have at howtoaba.com, how do you help folks kind of overcome some of these common challenges of maybe teaching someone to discriminate colors and shapes and things like that, but they don't have any functional communication and they're not toilet trained, et cetera, but they really, really want to do this other stuff that may be super reinforcing because you could see skill acquisition, but, maybe kind of lower down on the priority list in the big picture.
Well, I think one of the other common mistakes that plays into this is that people look at an assessment as a curriculum. Like, we're so trained, and maybe that's with the way, but we're so people are so dependent on an assessment that they get so focused on looking at those boxes on the assessment to move a student through the programs. And what we try to do is show practitioners how to take a step back and how to look at the whole child. So what we do when somebody comes into our community is there's like a series of just foundational concepts that any practitioner needs to know. So we take a practitioner through, how to look at the intake assessment, how to complete an assessment, what our version of that assessment looks like. There are a lot of practitioners who may spend 3 weeks with a student just completing an entire ABLS assessment. And while there may be pros to that, we also have to learn, like, how do we balance so much time on an assessment versus like getting to know the child and getting to know the family and figuring out what their goals are. And then so when somebody's in our community, we take them through that, and we take them through like our perspective on data collection. How do we as practitioners so often get caught up in the papers and the graphs and the data collection without being able to look at the big picture and look at the family and look at the student as a whole. So we kind of take them through that. We also bring our community together twice a month. So we have those live conversations where we're either doing a CEU or doing a Q&A on those things that matter, like now. Like, let's talk about, this issue with this student. How can we help you look at this objectively? Or how can we help you, be more analytic about it? We very often get questions, let's say, for example, where a practitioner was asking about how do I target a behavior for a student who keeps, I think it was like arguing with the therapist or with the parent. Like they tell him to do something and he's saying the opposite of that. So how do I put a behavior plan in place for this? And I think our answer was like, does it really need a behavior plan? Like, let's think about this and take a step back. Like, is this just annoying? Or is it something that, as behavior analysts, we need to like target and reduce and look at analytically? So I think we're able to be like a sounding board for some of those practitioners to look at things a little bit more objectively. And also our curriculum that we provide in our programs are very much not cookie cutter. Like there are a lot of places where you can go and, you get an ABLES H4 program, or you get, a G6 program that targets this specific box. We're very much not about that. And our programs are all across operants. So we'll look at, teaching how to answer WH questions. And it will go from like, technically like an ABLES receptive or visual perception all the way through intraverbal. So our programs really are in and of themselves more like just good teaching. They're taking people away from needing that like cookie cutter, fill in the box type of, I want to color this in on the ABLES solution, to a more like, how do I get this child just having a conversation? Because that's really what matters. It doesn't matter if he can, tact feature function class. It matters that he can say what he did that day and be able to talk about his weekend. And so that's what our programs do, is like they really take you, I think, to where the kids really need to get.
Are you looking for a new job, but you're overwhelmed with all the emails that you're getting from various ABA agencies? What if there was someone who was in your corner and could help you find the perfect job placement? Well, that person exists. Barbara Voss has been working as a recruiter for over 30 years, and her company, HRIC, specializes in placing BCBAs in permanent full-time positions throughout the United States. Barbara has been placing BCBAs since 2011, so she knows our business, and she offers personalized service to any BCBA looking for a new position. She also helps companies looking to hire BCBAs too. Here are just some of the things Barbara can help you with. She can provide information about salary ranges in different markets across the country. She can help you write your resume. She can coordinate and prepare you for the interview process, and even help negotiate the right salary for you. And best of all, there are no charges to any candidate for all of these services. When you're ready to make a change and want to work with someone who will listen to you and understand what you need in a new position, contact Barbara at HRIC. To schedule a confidential discussion, head over to hricolorado.com. Again, that's hricolorado.com, and hit the contact button to connect with Barbara. You won't be disappointed. So it sounds like you're kind of writing these things so that the learner is not subject to such, tightly restricted stimulus control, and perhaps has a more well-rounded repertoire. So that sounds really neat. Just kind of reflecting on what you guys are talking about here, it seems like there's, lots of good information for the practice of behavior analysis on the clinical side. What are some of the things that you guys do to support practitioners as it relates to the kind of, I don't know how to describe it, maybe the larger issue things in terms of, are there other ways in which you support practitioners with just like giving them tips about how to, manage time, or how to keep things from not, getting procrastinated, or things like that? Are there specific tools that you find helpful? I know sometimes people use specific apps and things like that to keep themselves on track. What are you guys seeing that's out there that's working to help people just kind of manage the day-to-day stuff? And so I'll just kind of leave it there.
Yeah, for sure. So it's funny. I always seem to reference my high school English teacher from way back then. Always had an acronym called KISS, right? Keep it simple, something or other. Anyways, I usually talk about that all the time in our Q&As and, all the time in the CEUs that we do, because that is huge, right? There, like you said, Matt, there's so much out there, and where do you go? You can Google stuff and you can find things online, and whether that's ethical or not, what have you, but there's way, way too much information. And, for everything that you find out there, you find something conflicting saying something else. You can read all the journal articles in the world, which I do definitely recommend reading journal articles, but, which ones do you read? Which ones are the right ones to read? So, we say, keep it simple. Let's look at your end goal. What is your end goal? And we're constantly talking about that. Ask parents, what is their end goal? You're doing assessments and looking at the assessments and saying, okay, what's the next step of this, period? And communication is huge. So communication with family members to ask them about goals, but also communication among team members to ask them about goals, right? Shira and I both don't come from big agencies, so we don't have a huge department that's just based on, communication with families or HR, et cetera. So typically what we do is when we see a child, when we see an individual, and the team, what we'll do is almost immediately after we've seen them, we're sending out our notes so that we're sharing that communication. In terms of apps and things like that we use, honestly, we use basic shared calendar. We use Google Drive, encrypted. We use, a to-do list app for sure. And then we listen to podcasts to stay up to date. Mainly yours, but we listen to a few other ones as well. And, that's it. And I think really the other big message that we give to our team is setting ground rules. So, as newer BCBAs, as any BCBA in the field, especially if you're working with kids who are still living at home and, parents are exhausted and then they find the time to email you at midnight, or they're trying to call you on the weekend because it's the only time they have. We really need to set ground rules as professionals saying, what are our office hours? Sure, it's okay to contact me on the weekends, but I'm taking Mondays off, or whatever that is. And that's a huge message. So I think I'm veering off topic a little bit now too, but going back to keeping it simple.
No, you're veering into something I think really, really important that I hadn't thought to ask you guys about, because I see this all the time where, the whole idea of setting and establishing and maintaining boundaries is huge. And you don't want, there are some, there's some cases I've had where a stakeholder, regardless of who it might be, emails you a question, you answer it, and then they email you right back, and they're almost treating email as if it's instant messaging, or texting and things like that. And so those have been times where I've had to either set some boundaries, either directly or indirectly, by kind of giving myself a rule. Okay, I'm going to respond. I'm going to give an interval of time before I respond here. So I don't want to give the perception that I'm, at 7:45 at night as I'm interacting with my family, that I'm on my computer having this kind of this exchange with a parent or a teacher or what have you. So thank you for veering into that area, because I think that's something that is really important to highlight, and it's especially important, I think, again, with lesser experienced practitioners who want to be helpful, right? And they want to be responsive. They don't want to be seen, and there might be some kind of hidden contingencies to be available. Because you don't want a parent or another stakeholder to complain to your agency or something like that. And so I think that's a fantastic point. And I'm so glad you brought it up.
Yeah,
Shayna taught me really, really early from when I started working with her not to respond to emails on the weekend, because in behavior analytic terms, if you're reinforcing parents contacting you on the weekend with a response, they're going to continue to do it. So very early on, I was trained to just not respond to parents on the weekends. And that could look different for everyone else, but I think it's really important to have those boundaries and stick to them so that we're not, reinforcing behaviors that we don't want to be increasing. I think the other thing, just back to your question about what, tools that would be helpful, without sounding too promotional, I really think the tool that we created is what new BCBAs need, just because like you need that community. You just need a place to go. And I still, look up in our share drive or in our membership, the things that I need, and just having a place to go where everything's all in one place, I think is a great resource. Otherwise, like, we speak to the individual practitioner. It's kind of like Shayna said, like, keep it simple. Don't get too bogged down with, too many apps and too many different solutions. And I think it's just about know what you need and have a place to go to find it.
Yeah. Well said. One other, I guess, email. Getting back to the email piece is a lesson my wife taught me. Is if there's not a question in the email, don't respond to it, or you don't feel compelled to respond to it. If you're not being asked a question, unless it's some, I was, and I don't always follow that rule to the T, but it's made me more mindful about how we engage in these, kind of one-way communication, whether it's a text or an email or something like that. And I've found that to be really at times very helpful advice, because it can facilitate that pinging back and forth that is both unnecessary and time consuming. And if other people that interact with you, you can shape that their repertoires as it relates to how they communicate with you as well, in addition to doing things like not responding to emails on the weekends or even in the evenings and things like that. One other email, I guess, strategy I try to do, I don't always stick to it, but is I also try not to send emails in off hours either, because sometimes that will, like, just, I mean, I'll do it for, kind of non-business stuff, but if it's work related, I try not to do it, because I don't want to put that pressure on someone else to respond, at 9:30 at night, just because I had a random question pop in my mind. I'll either compose the email and save it to send it later, or just wait till the business hours to compose and send it. So
yeah, one of the best things that I discovered is that you can schedule your emails. So you can write it at night and schedule it to go out the next morning. So like, that's just a simple way to, like, get what's in your head out of your head, but not have it be sent at midnight when I, tend to respond to emails.
Cool. I'm glad we got to some of these kind of quality of life kind of strategies and with the boundaries and the communication stuff. So, and again, these are things that you're not going to see on the task list. Right. So this is precisely the type of supports that I think you guys are in a unique position to provide. All right, folks. Last break of the podcast. I just want to let you know that I'm throwing a 5-year anniversary sale for all Behavioral Observations podcast CEU events. That's right. The podcast it turns 5 on February 21st, or it's possibly the 22nd, because it was in the wee hours in which I hit publish. So that's a story for a different day, but let's get to the facts at hand here. Get 55% off all CEU events by using the promo code 5years. That's 5 years, all one word, all lowercase, at behavioralobservations.com/get CEUs. This offer is valid at the time of this podcast publication, all the way through the end of February 2021. So again, go to behavioralobservations.com/get CEUs and use the code 5years to save 55%. And if you don't need CEUs, but you want to get ad-free podcasts, access to bonus content, member Q&A, Zoom hangouts, and more, consider joining the Behavioral Observations Patreon group. There's a lot of cool stuff there. It's a new group, and it's fun to see it grow and hang out with folks. So to learn more about it, go over to patreon.com/behavioral observations. And all of this information will be in the show notes for this episode, so you can just check it out at behavioralobservations.com as well. All right, let's get back to the conclusion of this fun podcast with the folks from How to ABA. Speaking of supports, and I know you guys do a lot of CEs and things like that, what are you seeing as the kind of need for see? What are people wanting to learn about? And conversely, there's certainly things that people want to learn about, and then there's things that people need to learn about. Sometimes those two there's some overlap between those two things, sometimes not. So tell me about what you're seeing as the continuing ed needs in the field from your perspective, because you interact with so many behavior analysts.
For sure. Most of our members, are usually individual practitioners. They're in it for the love of ABA, they're in it for their clients, and they really want to just use their behavior analytics skills effectively. So most of our clients are looking for CEUs related to the practical application of ABA. So, they can go to this workshop over here on the theory of this or the theory of that, but really it's that practicality piece of how do I use this when? So, for instance, how do we use assessments effectively as a tool, but not as a curriculum? Right? Okay, specifically, how do we teach across operants instead of just teaching, B26 or H31, et cetera? How do we go across all those operants, and how do we do that effectively and evidence-based? Learning which data collections to use and when, that's a huge one. Many of our members are saying, okay, great, we know how to write this program, or I know how to do this, or I know how to teach this, but how do I measure it? And I know I need to measure it, but how? Because these data sheets are becoming so cumbersome. So how do I measure this effectively? And how do I look at that data to see what I really need to see? And that's a huge one.
Well, the answer to that's easy. It's you measure rate and you use a standard acceleration chart. Everyone knows that, right?
Obviously.
I kid. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was like, okay, Ogden.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people come in. It's ironic because we learn so much about behavior and behavior management, and we get a lot of questions of like, how do I even do a functional assessment, and how do I write a behavior plan? What is, how do I reduce this challenging behavior? I don't think we have enough training on the practical application of, I have all this background on why it's important and what behavior means and what challenging behavior, why it's a problem. But I think it's the implementation that we get a lot of questions of like, now what do I do? Like, I have this kid who has this, challenging behavior of he screams, every time he's handed a worksheet to do. And people are really lost. And I don't blame the practitioner. I think it's a flaw in maybe the training that we receive, and also maybe the quality of supervision. And I think that everyone's kind of figuring it out as we go along. And that's like why we want to be able to help people figure it out. But I think that people are really lost in the implementation of a lot of the theory that we learn. I think one of the other things that people really come to us for is some of the modeling that we do on the programs. So we'll, demonstrate certain programs or demonstrate how to do certain skills. And I think people don't get enough of that. They don't get enough of that in person. Like, this is what it actually looks like when we're working with a kid on this skill, or this is what this program looks like. Back to, putting it into practice, not just in theory, but in practice, this is what it actually looks like. So that's something that people do come to us a lot for as well.
Shira and I were both ABA therapists before Shira was a teacher first, and then she was an ABA therapist. I was an ABA therapist before I was a consultant. And I think that's huge for those BCBAs who've never been, quote unquote, in the chair doing therapy. I highly, highly recommend it, because most of the time when I'm consulting, telehealth is a little bit different right now, but most of the time when I'm consulting, I'm like, get out of the chair. It's my turn. Let me show you how to do this, or let me try, and let me see if I can find that error pattern so that we can, solve this problem together.
Yeah, everything we've put in place is because we've run it, right? And there's so many behavior analysts who, like Shayna said, have never really run the programs. Like, they're given the program and they're saying, here's what you need to do, but have they done it? Have they really, troubleshooted what happens when I'm running this program and it's just not working? And I think that's a big part of knowing how to supervise and plan and program, is that we've been there and we know, what it looks like to actually run the program. So we would highly recommend just more experience with putting those programs in place, getting in the chair, demonstrating, modeling, figuring out what works for that specific student.
I want to ask, speaking of kind of practical experience, I'm curious to see what your guys' experience is with this, and it's this topic of the functional analysis. I've worked with a lot of people who've gone through their coursework, and also, quite frankly, I've worked with a lot of BCBAs who've never run an actual FA. Even though it says you're supposed to, and whether that's a standard functional analysis or the practical functional assessment model, or even a brief or trial based, just haven't run any iteration of any type of analytic assessment procedure. And there's, going back about 5 or 6 years or so, there was a couple of surveys in Java attesting to that, or providing evidence to that, where most BCBAs don't use FAs in their practice. I hope those data have changed, in the number of years in which those studies have been published. But I don't know. Is that something that you've seen in your work with your community, that people come to you like, what, I was supposed, this part was kind of glossed over in my supervision?
Yeah, I mean, I can even speak from personal experience here. So, I started in this field in 1997, and I got my BCBA in 2005. And I would say that, before 2005, you read about Iwata. I mean, Hanley wasn't even around then, but, I read about Iwata, and it was kind of one of those things that, maybe it was emerging, but we didn't do. And then one of my professors was Hank Rohn, and I went to see him in Massachusetts, and I saw his clinic. And frankly, I got completely overwhelmed. I mean, I'm a lonely old practitioner, in someone's basement doing therapy way back in 2003, 2004. And, I go to his clinic, and he's got one-way mirrors. He's got grad students. He's got a computer. And there's like 5 people taking data on and doing this functional analysis. And it was really awesome the way it was run. But I really had to take a deep breath and go, holy cow, I'm definitely not doing things like this. But you know what, though? I have to say, I still don't do things like that. And I'm okay with that. I do functional analyses, but I don't do that hardcore one-way mirror functional analyses, because I don't typically get individuals like that. If I get an individual who presents very, very very challenging behaviors, that the function is completely unknown, it's not in my field of practice. It's not in my scope. I refer them out, because that's not what I do. I will do functional analyses for individuals on a much lower scale, but a functional analysis doesn't need to be a one-way mirror with 5 graduate students, etc. It can be more like Hanley's approach. We do an interview, and then we manipulate antecedent variables, and within 2 hours, you can really have an idea of what the function is. Or we can go into schools, and we can, look at Sarah Bloom's functional analysis, and we can do something like that. So it doesn't have to be your, 1 month analysis on negative behavior before we get this and before we get that. Do some individuals need that? Absolutely. Do I do that? No, I don't do that. And I would refer out to do that piece. So I guess back to your question of, what do you do in terms of functional analyses? Yes, absolutely. Functional analysis is completely, what we need to do, but we need to define what type of functional analyses we need to do or are doing in our profession.
Yeah, I think it's really intimidating coming into the field and reading the research articles and understanding the level of complexity that goes into a functional analysis. And I think that's, when you see it, like Shayna said, being done with tons of support and all these people and, computers and mirrors and all of that, it's intimidating as a practitioner to really know how to do that. And I think that people are scared and people are intimidated about implementing something. And I think one of the reasons why Hanley was so popular is because it speaks to you can do this. There is a way for you to do this as an individual practitioner where it doesn't take a month and you don't need tons of students and support. But yet it's still really important to do. And, even I'll confess that I didn't really do a functional assessment / analysis until a couple years after I had my BCBA. And it was intimidating. And, I did it, and now I feel more comfortable with it, but I get the nerves involved in someone coming into the field and feeling really intimidated by it. And also the fact that we put so much emphasis on our ability to reduce challenging behaviors, you feel that pressure of needing to know what to do, right at the gate. And you don't really have to, you really need practice and time and, people that can help.
Yeah. And Oh, I was going to say, and on a different note, just in terms of ABC graphs, one of my biggest pet peeves, ABC logs. ABC logs are really great for a day or two. So if I'm going into somewhere to consult and, I need some information is better than none. Or if I'm doing telehealth, here, fill out this ABC chart. Here's how to do it. Let me come back in 2 days from now and look at that data. So often we find is that we'll go into a school setting, for instance, and teachers will have, reams and reams and reams of data and ABC charts. Do you know how cumbersome that is? The only reason you need an ABC chart is to figure out the function. Once you've got the function, get rid of that ABC chart and go to frequency, go to duration. I don't need anything else. Make it as easy as possible for people, right? After you've figured out that function.
I couldn't agree more. I've seen that, because a lot of times those data don't even get looked at and analyzed. It just becomes part of the folklore of doing behavior stuff. And we as a field sometimes fall into these practices that aren't all that productive or functional. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate that. That's definitely a pet peeve of mine too. All right, very good. So I know we're getting close to our allotted time here. So I want to do a couple things here. One is I want to give you guys an opportunity to share with folks in terms of how they can learn more about what you do if they want to get a hold of you and things like that. I'm assuming that howtoaba.com is the kind of general clearinghouse of where people can interact with you. I'm also aware that you guys have a newsletter that sends out helpful information periodically too. People can jump on that at the website too. But I want to give you the floor basically. I know we've been talking about it, kind of advice for the newly minted throughout the entire podcast. So my standard closing question, I think, might be a tad redundant here, but I want to give you the floor in case there are any kind of concluding thoughts or messages that you'd like to leave the audience, regardless of their experience level.
Yeah, I think as a field, we could all be more supportive of each other. I think BCBAs kind of get a bad rap for, not being so supportive, and potentially, if you're ever on any of those Facebook groups, the constant reminder of being like, guys, you need to be nice.
Yes.
You need to be respectful. And just because someone asks a question doesn't mean that you need to tell them why they shouldn't have asked that question. So I think as a field, we could be more supportive of each other. Obviously Facebook may not be the best forum, but that being said, we don't have to be as, I think, condescending as we may give off, both to our parents and to fellow professionals. So I think that's something that we try to emphasize, is just being more supportive, more sensitive, more respectful, both to each other, to professionals in the field, to our families that we work with, to the kids that we work with, accepting diversity, accepting that people are coming from different backgrounds, accepting different levels of experience, and talking about how we could just help each other.
The other take-home point would be that supervision doesn't have to end after you pass the exam, right? Go out and find a mentor. And it's okay to not know everything at once. It's okay to admit not knowing everything all at once. A lot of people just don't know where to ask for help. Some people don't even know that they need help, but it's hard because it can be lonely out there. So, find that mentor, ask for help, come to How to ABA. We've got lots of free resources as well. Come read our stuff.
Very cool.
So,
all right.
Matt,
I
also wanted to let you know, we're doing an ABA forum to give back to the community. So, again, How to ABA is all about this collaboration and dissemination. We're collaborating with the folks at Supervision Academy, and we're doing a 3-night speaker event coming up in March 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. It's free. It's called theabaforum.com to sign up. And like I said, it's on March 2nd, 3rd, and 4th from 7 till 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. There's going to be amazing speakers at it. Sasha Long from the Autism Helper, Dr. Megan Miller from B Collective, Liz Willis, who's a BCBA and an SLP, is going to be talking. Ashley Rose and I are doing a presentation on, she's from Mission Cognition, so on social skills. Shira and I are doing a presentation. Rose Griffin and Rachel Torrance are doing a presentation for supervision. So there'll be supervision CEU, there'll be an ethics CEU, there'll be other CEUs to get, and it's all through the abaforum.com on March 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. And again, it's about this collaboration and dissemination and giving back to the community.
Yeah, we thought, especially after being virtual for so long, it would be really nice to get everybody together and do it live. There'll be even breakout rooms and opportunities to network. Like we all lost out on, attending ABAI in person. We're all losing out on some of those conferences that really just like reinvigorate like why we're doing this, being able to talk to people in the field. And we haven't been doing that for a year. And I think it would be really nice. Like there's tons of courses you could take and videos you can watch, but actually coming together and participating live with other professionals in the field, I think would be a really nice opportunity. And we're just really excited to be hosting it.
Very cool. That's really awesome for you guys to do that. What a way to give back. So, Shira and Shayna, it's been great chatting with you guys. Thanks so much for putting this awesome resource together to support our practitioner base. And we'll have all the links to the resources that you guys mentioned in the show notes over at behavioralobservations.com. So thanks, guys, for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for what you do for the field. Listening to podcasts in my car has been like a saving grace for my entire career and life. So I really appreciate what you do for the field too.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.